So I wanted to show you that as something very clearly important to notice. Again, from Heiser, the verdict is inescapable. The Mesopotamian Apkallu story accounts for each element of Genesis 6, verse 1 to 4. So Genesis 6, verse 1 to 4, Apkallu would then be the watchers who came down, who sinned, who slept with women. Any interpretation of that passage, Genesis 6, verse 1 to 4, says Heiser, that fails to account for this transparent correlation cannot be correct. In other words, he's saying, if you don't read Genesis 6, verse 1 to 4, knowing in Moses' head that he's directly fighting the Mesopotamian Apkallu story, then you are wasting your time. We have in the Apkallu saga the long-sought rationale for why Genesis 6, verse 1 4 is in the book of Genesis. The purpose was not to tell us about the godly human line of Seth, because that's the arguments that get made to say the angels didn't have sex, or convey the aversion to divinized kings having harems. Rather, Genesis 6, verse 1 to 4 is part of a sacred scripture because the writer, aka Moses, was taking aim at Mesopotamian theology and the myth of the Babylonian superiority. I don't think you can get it more simply. Again, let me remind you, if I haven't yet enough times, Michael Heiser is a Christian who is here telling you Christianity needs to get its head out of where the sun isn't shining and start getting a proper perspective of what's going on in Genesis. And I agree with him. Okay, if that's not convincing enough for you that Moses actually is writing to counteract the Apkallu Mesopotamian story, let me tell you another piece of evidence that should convince you. This is the Mesu or the Misu tree, however the Babylonian Mesopotamian way would have been to say it perfectly. I'm not sure, there might be a pronunciation that I'm getting a little bit off here. The point is, what is this that you're looking at, or a depiction that I've chosen to give you the picture of it? If you're seeing something that looks like a tree merging with clouds and having roots that's clearly going through the clouds, even down to earth, you'd be right. This would be, guess what this would mean in English? The cosmic tree. Now, if I say to you cosmic tree, what immediately in Genesis do you think of?
Genesis 1.
What about it?
Genesis,
Yeah, what about it in Genesis are you seeing if I say a cosmic tree?
maybe the tree of life specifically.
There we go. And the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's something supernatural is going on here. Did Moses take the idea of that? Not take the idea as in he made it up. Did he correct the false Mesu tree from Mesopotamian culture and restore it to its original story? I'm going to go with yes, that's what he did. I just wanted to show you that this is in Mesopotamian culture so that you can see further evidence of what Moses is actually doing. Now, you'll remember I showed you this last week, the process of the priests and how that was supposed to work. We started with the Levites. We said that, wait, we're first supposed to be the firstborn of Israel. But the firstborn of Israel kind of messed up, obviously, in their own way. But when we go back to, and obviously the firstborn of Israel messing up is why the Levites kick in. That's my family. But we went back and we said Melchizedek. But how did he get into that position? Because surely if there's a priesting of the firstborns, then the nation's firstborns should have been doing that. And I'm going to argue that that's probably exactly what was happening. And with that bugger up, led to the need for people like Melchizedek and other lone righteous people who then gets pointed out by Moses in any case in Genesis, because he's like so desperate to acknowledge the men who were or women who were actually righteous in their days. But obviously, what did I point out to you? That the firstborn sons of God is actually angels. So I want to bring you back to that to show you when we're talking about this rebellions that you need to keep this perspective in mind. Ultimately, I believe the angels would have been the priests first. And in some way, they still actually hold some of that characterization in the process of what happens. Okay, sorry. So we're turning now to the mountains of the gods. We are talking about cosmic geography here after all. Here's a bit of reading here now. So Mark 9, verse 2 to 9. This, I don't have to read this. Jesus takes Peter and James and John up to the mountain. Transfiguration happens and he sees, they see Moses and they see Elijah. What I want to say to you, they're on a mountain. Now the question is, going to be a what mountain? And he tells them, don't tell anyone this until I rise from the dead. And I want you to remember what I said about that serpent. Becomes the prototype, the picture, the poster child of the underworld. Keep that in mind. So when and where does this happen? So remember, this is famous verse, and it's beautiful because it talks about Jesus. We see Moses, we see Elijah. It represents the coming Messianic kingdom. Lovely, love it. All of it's true. All of it's great. But the question is, when and where did this happen? Now, we've seen that it's in Mark 9, so that's obvious already. But I want to take you back one chapter, and in Mark 8, verse 27 to 30, although you can compare this with other gospels that tell the same story because they go into more detail, would you believe that this happens 6 days after Jesus is in Caesarea Philippi, where he asks the people, who do you say that I am? And they say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, prophet. And this is where he tells Peter that he is the Satan. Get behind me, Satan. Obviously, in Mark's version, that gets left out. I think I know why it might get left out in Mark's version. Um, it might have something to do with the fact that Mark is most likely inspired by Peter, and Peter might be a little bit embarrassed about this part of the story where he actually makes the blunder he did. I can't uh, say that absolutely, but it's kind of there in a way to say that. Strange Gospel. This is my book, and I want you to take a portion out of this to show, or a few portions out of this. Um, I will show you this just to give you an idea of where I'm going with this. But this is not in totality everything I want to say about the mountain issue. I just want to show you that it's in the book, and the upcoming book obviously will give more of this. But just have a look at this. This is just extracts. I haven't put page numbers. God therefore makes Moses climb a mountain because Israel, who said yes at the mountain, is going to lead the way back to bring the rest of God's children from the nations who said no back to God in repentance. It is because the ancestors of the nations, excluding Israel, said yes on Mount Hermon that God had to counteract that covenant between the fallen rebels and the nations by God creating a new nation, one which was not in existence when the deal was struck at Mount Hermon. That's when the Watchers did what they did. That is my family story. We, Israel, existed because of the trouble caused at Hermon. So in other words, if the nations didn't screw that up, they wouldn't need to be in Israel. Another quote, is it not fitting that God starts on the program to reverse the effects of Mount Hermon by bringing my ancestors out of one of the products of Mount Hermon, namely Egypt, because Egypt is satanically, obviously, in terms of being pagan and all of that, coming from the effects of Hermon, and gather my ancestors at Mount Sinai. So where your ancestors, this is talking to Gentiles, said yes to rebellion at Mount Hermon, mine said yes to redemption at Sinai. And not just redemption for Israel, redemption for everyone eventually. Another quote by Genesis 6, Moses is trying to undermine the satanic kingdom's gospel. If Jerusalem is God's chosen geography on planet Earth, Satan's geography with God's allowance is Babylon. Therefore, Moses will mention the Tower of Babel in his history lesson for Israel. So you see that I've spoken in the book about geography, Satan's geography, God's geography. Another quote here, they touched down on a mountain presenting themselves as gods. This would be the Watchers again now, who were to be worshipped. This should ring a bell because in the telling of the story of Israel, in the telling of the story of what Israel is to do as part of God's rescue mission, Moses stresses the fact that he meets with God on a mountain. So there I'm pointing out again the geography, the cosmic. Why? Because mountains become like pictures of supernatural in this way. This is not accidental, but very definitely done to counteract the arrival of the celestial rebels, an event Israel would have been educated in while in living in Egypt. So again, note Moses writes with intention to a Jewish audience. So again, you're seeing the picture of that cosmic geography where a mountain, which is physical, gets used in a cosmic metaphor, so to speak. This speaks to what we've just looked at in the scripture. Caesarea Philippi specifically incorporated the very important area of Mount Hermon, which features so prominently in the story of the fallen watchers. Jesus' intentional movement to that location to speak about the Son of Man and then asking the disciples about their perspective on himself proves that the issue of geography is as important to the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of God as it has ever been. I'm almost done. I think this is just one of the second last ones. To highlight the persistent nature of the fight on the geographical and theological grounds between the competing kingdoms, that being of God and the satanic, which I'm using generally, satanic in a general sense. Note the connection between Canaan and Babel. You know how Joshua takes Canaan, and you also know that there were giants in Canaan at the time. So I jumped a few lines. So here is what you need to add to that logic. Canaan is the invention of the way earlier, watch this phrase, Mesopotamian civilizations such as Babel. If you scan through the Tanakh, Old Testament, you will come across the word Baal, which is a god of darkness. The number of times this name comes up is itself evidence of the intertwined nature of the two kingdoms gospels running concurrently. So when I say two kingdoms gospels, I mean of darkness and of light. And Baal becomes, again, another picture of the underworld and death and all of that. So that's the important thing there. And this is the last quote now. So here in Matthew 16, Jesus, that's talking about Caesarea Philippi, that event. Jesus is standing at a location which is the geographical symbol of the origins of the kingdom of darkness. Jesus stands at the proverbial metaphorical doorway of the powers of darkness. So guys, this is in Strange Gospel, and I really, if you haven't read it properly, read it again and again and again, if you do have it. If you don't have it, email me at darrenjonker@gmail.com if you're listening to this online. That's DARINJONKER. I might just put this when I edit the video later, I'll put that email on as well. That's the book that's talking a little bit about this, but that's not even all there is. The next one that's coming out, I'm probably going to change this title just to Fire on the Mountain of the Gods, rather, as opposed to Pentecost, although it will incorporate Pentecost. I'll flip that around. Here is the chapter headings that's coming. Minding Moses between heaven and earth, you're worshipping a foreign god, serpents and ladders. In the beginning, Seed Wars, which is familiar, of course, now with this teaching series. Babylon falling, the Ark Mountain on earth as it is in heaven. The horsemen are coming. And whose mountain is it anyway? You can see more than one reference there to mountains, which should tell you something of what's coming there. Okay, so let's move on. So last week in Seed Wars, there was something that, in Seed Wars, there's something that and I don't think we got into this properly. So I'm going to quickly push through it again. You might remember I mentioned something about north is not just north. Again, this goes into geography, of course. So I want to show you a bit about that. So in order to give you a good indication of what this was going to be, welcome to the underworld. So when north is mentioned prophetically by the gospel, prophets, there's something about the underworld. Now, here's that quote I did say to you from Isaiah. It is chapter 14. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. Above the stars of God, I will sit my throne on high. There's what the serpent or that being did. I will sit on the Armageddon, which is the Mount of Assembly, in the far reaches of where? Of the north. I pointed out, I think a bit last week, I'm sure I did, that the constant mention of the north is not just a point on the, cardinal point on a compass, on a map. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. There's that word, Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. And this kind of echoes what the serpent gets told. Ezekiel 8 verse 5. Just another example of this. Then he said to me, Son of man, lift up your eyes towards the north. So I lifted up my eyes towards the north, and behold, north of the altar gate, in the entrance was this image of jealousy, idolism that was happening in the temple when Elijah sees it. Ezekiel sees it. And as I say, it is related to the north, and that's the point. Okay, so what are you looking at now? This is, I think I did tell you this. Anyway, it doesn't matter. This is a mountain, Jebel Akra, which is on the border between Syria and Turkey, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's between those two. Quite a noticeable mountain, as you can imagine. Now, remember we've mentioned Baal, and I've told you that in the Mesopotamian culture too, Baal, and it gets proliferated through the rest of the cultures too. Baal becomes the picture of the underworld, the dead, and so on. So specifically, yes, highs again, specifically Baal's home was a mountain. There's that word mountain that comes up again. Now known as Jebel al-Akra, situated on the north, see there, north of Ugarit. In ancient times, it was simply known as Tsafan, which is north. Tsapanu in Ugaritic, it was a divine mountain, the place where Baal had council. Isn't that interesting? Baal had council meetings, as he ruled the gods of the Canaanite pantheon. So you're seeing the picture of what's getting twisted here. Baal's palace was thought to be on the heights of Tsapanu of Zaphon. And this gets mentioned in scripture. The north is Zaphon. So you can see that when the prophets are writing about this, they're having the negative picture of Baal. So Baal would mean prince, basically Lord of the underworld or Lord of the dead. Baalzebub, now this is where it might sound noticeable. Baalzebub or Beelzebub. But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, it is only by Beelzebub, the prince of demons, that this man casts out demons in Matthew 12:24. Please note, not all Pharisees said this. The group that was fighting with Jesus said this, and it was a very bad statement to make, no doubt, and they get slammed for it. But the point is, look what they call him, Beelzebub. What does that tell you? The Jews know the story of this Baal story. And they are accusing Jesus of being able to do what he does because he is being empowered by this Baal, this Beelzebub, the Lord of the dead, Lord of the flies, the dead. Obviously, Jesus counteracts that. So what did they mean with that? You see, if they understood that this figure that was high was cast down and was demoted down to the pits and into the lowest forms. Remember, Pharisees believed in resurrection. So the Pharisees obviously saw that death would be overcome by resurrection. So they were trying to defend what they thought was true. And so they do give Jesus an insult. That was the intention. And obviously it would have worked. So what do they mean by it? They're actually trying to associate him with a fallen being. They're trying to associate him with someone who was trying to elevate himself, which they obviously understand Jesus is kind of, his actions are implying that he's elevated, right? If he's forgiving sins and doing these things, then he's elevating himself. So what are they doing? They're trying to ironically bring him back down to earth, if you can see it that way. It is insulting, but they were wrong, of course, and they deserve criticism for being wrong in their context. But you can also see a way where they're trying to defend what they believe is God's honor, because they struggle to accept that he could be basically who he's claiming to be. So I think it's important to get that. So again, here's the reference of this one that's trying to go up. So they were associating him with this prophecy of Isaiah, which obviously, as I say, is an insult. So now in terms of what happens to that serpent, aka what Paul gets called Satan, although as we said, there's not actually evidence in the Old Testament that's the association. Let's just look at something here. In Genesis 3:14, it says, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all the beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. You shall be put to, no, not you. You shall be put to shame. Sorry, that shouldn't be there actually. All the days of the life you will eat dust. Now we know that the snakes don't literally eat dust. We know that a snake wasn't actually talking to Eve either. The point is cursed, brought down, and there's a clear mention of being brought down to earth. Another thing is this: in earth, the word in Hebrew for earth, which could be eretz, if you want to call it like that, can also mean the underworld. So it can actually mean underworld. So imagine if you apply that meaning in Genesis, then you'd be cursed to the underworld. And that wouldn't be wrong either, because that's where the story of Baal comes. So Jeremiah 17:13 shows some evidence of that. O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth. For they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water. Look what it says. Those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth. Now you see, that means that the translators here understood something of what Jeremiah is meaning. And instead of saying on the earth, which would be taken too literally, they instead choose to say in the earth, implying therefore that they understood that eretz can actually mean in the earth. And that's the reason why I show that example. Now, the earth is really the Lord's. So even though these fallen beings have territorial access and they've been able to do things and they have been doing things, I want to show you that God has never actually been out of control. And he's actually quite aggressively taking back territory. And here's just one of the evidences of that. Psalm 82. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly? This is God talking to these watchers, the Elohim that he put in charge of the nation. So keep in mind now, this is now talking to them, criticizing them. So don't get confused here. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? In other words, they were favoring the wicked. So God's going to act on that. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. In other words, they were tasked with looking after these nations, even while God's angry with them. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are watching now. Here's the clear evidence. You are gods, sons of the Most High. There God gives his highest title. He says, you are authorities. You are my sons. That's intimate. You are sons of the Most High. That shows that he's on top. All of you. Nevertheless, what does he say? For their judgment, like men you shall die and fall like any prince. Isn't that an interesting reference? Fall like any prince when one has already fallen. Arise, O God. This is now the psalmist that's calling out for justice. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. Isn't that beautiful? God's going to have all the nations in the end. They are his. He was never not going to redeem them. It was always the plan to redeem them. 1 Samuel 5, verse 1 to 5. I'm not going to try and quote all of this now. This is the portion where the Ark of the Covenant goes into the Philistines' territory, and the priests of Dagon have the ark in their holy place. And what happens is day after day they go in and something goes on. The idol falls over one day, the next day the idol falls over and it's broken, arms and legs broken off. They are not idiots. They realize something is on. And watch what it says this. This is why the priests of Dagon, all who enter the house of Dagon, do not tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. In other words, these guys know this other God's ark is clearly more powerful than our gods. And if we tramp on that territory now where that ark is standing, we'll be in trouble. I think that's so powerful. It shows that even though these guys were lied to and they were passionate about their paganism, they understood when a more powerful God gets into the space. And that's God showing his supremacy, of course. Another interesting one that we can't go very deep into, but I just want to show you again. We're just trying to touch on some cosmic geography here. Armageddon. Are you sure about that in terms, and I'm making obviously a pun, are you sure about Armageddon being the place where the final battle will take place? Okay, so in Revelation 16, verse 12 to 16, there might be evidence that it's actually not going to be where people think it's going to be that this happens. Now, obviously, in Revelation, it speaks about where this happened, and it does speak about Armageddon if you look in the English, but in Hebrew, it's called Armageddon. It says that, but that would be something a little bit different in the Hebrew. So I want to show you, this is not, sorry, excuse this quote at the bottom. I'll have to fix that in the edit. On that day, I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. So this is the point. So is it Armageddon, as in people normally think of Armageddon? And this is the evidence of where it's not quite the case. And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me, on whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly over him, as one weeps over his firstborn. So that's implying that when Israel sees Jesus, not all Israel, when the remnant, when those who have rejected him, when the final event happens, they will realize that Jesus was in fact who he claims to be. Not all Jews, because hundreds of thousands, if not millions, are accepting Jesus. So let's not make like they aren't. On that day, listen to this. On that day, the mourning in Jerusalem will be as great as the mourning for Hadad Ramon in the plain of Megiddo. The point of what this shows is that the Battle of Armageddon is actually going to probably be in Jerusalem, because that makes sense. Satan wants to come and take the area of God's, and God's been interfering in those areas where the other fallen watchers have been rebelling. So logically, the end point can't be anywhere outside of Jerusalem itself. So that is like a semantics issue that actually is able to be proved that it's Jerusalem that this is going to happen as opposed to some other place. And keep in mind the idea of Ramon. I'm going to show you something about that as well. Isaiah, okay. Yeah, I'm not going to worry about that one right now. That's fine. Let's look at Eden, Eden as a cosmic mountain itself. I said I wanted to show this. So here's a quote from Howard or Wallace Wallace Howard. The main feature of the Garden of God theme is the presence of the deity. The divine council meets there and decrees of cosmic importance are issued. So the point they're saying here is in the ancient cultures, which is not made up, it's real, mountains were gardens were where the divine councils would meet. And if you see when the prophets speak about God's divine council meetings, when it's in place of earth, it's in the Mount of Assembly. Now, Eden became that. So Eden became the Mount of Assembly. It was a form of that. And this is why all throughout ancient cultures, the gods meet on mountains. Mount Olympus for the Greeks, Mount Hermon, as we know, Mount Sinai. You think of Noah and the ark rests on Mount Ararat. This is your cosmic geography, because the mountain obviously is not implied not to be earth and not to be heaven. It's something in between. It's a bridge. Effectively, it's a portal in its own way. So again, there's some cosmic geography for you. And then I thought I have to drop this in because it's such a powerful story. Naaman, who is the Syrian commander who gets healed of leprosy miraculously and realizes, you know, the story of Naaman. That's what I'm saying. Naaman's dirt little secret. Who can tell me, actually, before I put it on, maybe, I think it's going to come on the slide now. Who can tell me what is the story of Naaman? What makes him famous? Anyone? The clue is on the image too. Let's read it. And again, sorry, please excuse the quote at the bottom. It's not Psalm 82. I'll fix this again. Then Naaman said, if not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth. From now on, your servant will not offer burnt offerings or sacrifice to any god but the Lord in this matter. May the Lord pardon your servant. When my master goes into the house of Ramon, there you see a word, to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Ramon. When I bow myself in the house of Ramon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. He said to him, go in peace. So what's happening here is Naaman realizes I'm like the in charge, like high up leader for a king who follows a pagan god. I've been healed by the God of Israel. So I realize he's the big guy, he's the real thing. But I've got to still serve my master as a king. And I can't exactly just walk up to this guy and tell him that, you know, this pagan stuff. So I have to go into this pagan temple with him and do what I have to do. But if I can take some sand from your, like 2 mule loads worth of ground from Jerusalem, from Israel, from the holy place, from God's geography, I can take it with me. Whenever I worship to your God, I will literally be on his land, in his turf that I'm taking with me. And again, he gets told by the prophet, go in peace. In other words, God accepts that. I mean, that's insane. He takes sand with him. Obviously, it's a metaphorical picture, but I just had to show you again the prophetic nature of that. And I think it's a beautiful picture of a Gentile that gets the picture of what's going on. The best of 7. What do I mean by the best of 7? I'm going to link it here to Azazel and Yom Kippur. I'm not going to say a lot about this because I want to try and not take too much longer here. But in the, I think it's the Essene community. In the Essene community, there was the idea. In the Essene community, Amanda's just coming and getting the phone. In the Essene community, there was the idea that there'd be 7 battles. Okay, she's loving me too, she said. In the Essene community, there were 7 battles according to the Essenes, where they said, well, at least 6 and 6, where the kingdom of darkness would win 3 times, and the kingdom of light would win 3 times. So they literally even use the term, the lots will be thrown and the lots will fall 3 times for the kingdom of darkness and 3 times for the kingdom of light. And then what I find so beautiful is they say the seventh lot, the seventh fall would be where the God of Israel steps in and pushes the conflict in the favor of himself. And I love that picture. I'm not saying they're absolutely right. I just love the picture of the lots and the fact that it's saying that there's this tense war going on, but in the end of the day, the true king, the true leader, the true one that's in power will take over everything. And I just think that's a beautiful picture that I thought is worth mentioning again, because we're talking cosmic geography, we're talking war and all of that. Now, when it's come to Yom Kippur in the past, we've spoken a bit about this. We've spoken a bit about the lot. Remember, we spoke again also about the lot, the goat for God that gets slaughtered, and the goat for Azazel that gets sent into the desert and effectively has to fall off a cliff. Not going to go into too much detail on that. But in Leviticus 16, it tells you this. You shall then take 2 goats and set them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and Aaron shall cast lots over the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord and the other lot for Azazel. And Aaron shall present the goat on which the lot fell for the Lord and use it as a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot fell for Azazel shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement over it, that it may be sent into the wilderness to Azazel. What's so powerful about this is Azazel gets spoken of here as a real being. So this is a real character, an entity who's becoming the prefiguring of the land of desolation, the space where demons effectively exist, and where there's a lack of shalom, where there's a lack of peace and a lack of all of that. That's what happens with the picture of Azazel. And I'm showing you this to show you just how definitive this is in Jewish theology. Leviticus 17:7. So they shall no more sacrifice their sacrifices to goat demons. There's linking to Azazel, after whom they whore. There we go, prostituting themselves. This shall be a statute forever for them throughout their generations. So yeah, is obviously, I'm not telling this is what Azazel looks like, but here's an artist's rendering of one of the ways the minds of people have suggested. If you look closely, obviously looking somewhat human, there's obviously the bat-like wings with horns on it. Always notice with horns, there's a reason why it traces back to Baal as well, and to the idea of the ox being a picture of power and strength, and obviously also paganism too. That's often why demons and Satan himself metaphorically gets given horns and a tail even. It's that bovine kind of picture that they're trying to create. So I just thought I'd throw that in to show you an idea. Now again, to jump back to Enoch 1 and verse 1 Enoch 10 verse 4 to 6. Here's just a quote that's worth seeing. The Lord said to Raphael, bind Azazel hand and foot and throw him into the darkness. And he made a hole in the desert. See where? In the desert, which was in Judah, and cast him there. He threw on top of him rugged and sharp rocks, and he covered his face in order that he might not see light, in order that he may be sent into the fire on that great day of judgment.